Hey class, we're getting into deep ecology now by way of the Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss. He was born in 1912 and died in 2009, so more or less 20th century Norwegian philosopher who developed deep ecology. So I have you looking at the Encyclopedia of Environmental Ethics and Philosophy entry on deep ecology. And in the entry, we have an interesting quote. So deep ecologists argue that environmental philosophy must recognize the values that inhere objectively in nature, independently of human wants, needs, or desires. So in other words, our understanding of the world is independent of what the world actually is, okay? And so this is getting us to start in terms of how it is that we're seeing the relationship between what's traditionally called the anthropocentric view of nature versus the non-anthropocentric view. And so deep ecology is the non-anthropocentric view. In other words, anthropocentrism is the idea that man is the center of the universe, humankind is the center of the universe, whereas the non-anthropocentric view, the deep ecologist, believes that nature is the center of our concern. So in other words, our concerns are independent from what it is that nature is doing and how nature is working, okay? And so we're looking at our interests as working in an egalitarian way with nature, and then likewise in terms of a holistic view of nature. And so we have some historical philosophical precedents there with Spinoza, likewise Martin Heidegger, and then also Aldo Leopold, who we looked at when we were looking at feminist philosophy. He's not a feminist philosopher, but he still was trying to get us to understanding the whole picture of how it is that we're experiencing nature, not just as something to react to, but something that we're living in and experiencing and we are a part of, okay? So Arne Næss and Sessions were the developers of deep ecology, and this came about sometime in the early 70s. And so deep ecology, the term itself, has to do with a radical approach to ecology. And so when we think of the word radical, we're thinking of the Latin word radix, whereas that has to do with the root of how it is that we're understanding ecology. So in other words, what we're doing is looking at this metaphysically. So in other words, the entry points out that there's emphasis on ontology and metaphysics. So ontology is the philosophical way that we're understanding being. And so if we're understanding our very being, we oftentimes see our being as something that is apart from nature. But when we're seeing it from a deep ecology standpoint, as a deep ecologist would look at it, we're seeing that being as one with nature. Okay, so that's the difference between a non-anthropocentric view versus an anthropocentric metaphysical account. And so when we're doing it, when we're thinking about it that way, we're seeing that radical step in terms of just our basic root outlook to understanding nature, okay? And so likewise, this is contrasted with the shallow view of ecology. And so the shallow view of ecology is one that we all recognize in terms of recycling and emissions control, etc. So in other words, recycling and emissions control are really only reactionary ways in which ecology is understood, because that is only a reaction to a mindset that needs to be changed from the get-go in terms of we're seeing ourselves as separate and dominant of nature as opposed to seeing ourselves as one with nature, and also seeing that our view, our anthropocentric view, is not the only view, okay? So when we're understanding that, we're understanding it not only philosophically, but we also are working in his practice to see this in terms of a personal experience as well. So in other words, a personal account of how it is this is working for Næss is what he's calling this ecology T. So that's the personal way in which we work through environmental problems, okay, by way of deep ecology. So a couple things to see is that we're seeing that all of life has intrinsic value for the deep ecologist, okay? So in other words, when we were looking at the ethical theories, we were seeing that we have, as human beings, value because, intrinsic value, because we are reasonable. So there's a difference there with the deep ecologist in terms of there being intrinsic value to all of life. And so we could also then extend that to not only be life, but also non-sentient beings as well, right? That in other words, we're not just considering things that are alive, we also need to consider non-sentient beings as well, things that are not alive as well as part of what we need to respect in terms of nature, okay? So that's important, and see this as what is termed metaphysical holism. In other words, our sense of environmental ecology needs to be understood metaphysically, because metaphysics is getting us to that ontological, experiential understanding of our ethical practice, okay? So see it as simple as that in other words, we're going one step behind how it is that we're understanding ethics to see this as a whole life practice, okay? An immersion into what is natural is seeing that we are a part of nature and working within nature to be something that Alan Watts would have as the world is your body. So in other words, our bodies are also natural, okay? And what we normally do is we see that as somehow apart from nature, and what a deep ecologist is trying to do is get us to see that we are one with nature, and that nature's way of working is only, we are only a part of the way that nature is working, okay? So with Arne Næss, we have this apron diagram. So see it really quite simply as we have our religious perspectives that are getting us to how it is that we're going to tie it together here in terms of the deep ecologist platform. So in other words, the deep ecologist platform ties together religious concerns to then figure out how the religious concerns along with the deep ecologist platform can be implemented. So the lower part of the apron is how the practice will be implemented in specificity. So that's how this apron is working. And so we could think of what are called the platform principles of deep ecology as understood by Arne Næss. So in other words, he came up with 8 principles. So this is how we could start thinking of his way of working through deep ecology as objective, okay? So the first platform principle is all living beings have intrinsic value. The second is the diversity and richness of life has intrinsic value. The third is expect to satisfy vital human needs. Except to satisfy vital human needs. Humankind does not have a right to reduce this diversity and richness. 4, it would be better for human beings if there were fewer of them, and much better for other living creatures. 5, today the extent and nature of human interference in the various ecosystems is not sustainable, and lack of sustainability is rising. 6, decisive improvement requires considerable change, social, economic, technological, and ideological. 7, an ideological change would essentially entail seeking a better quality of life rather than a raised standard of living. 8, those who accept the aforementioned points are responsible for trying to contribute directly or indirectly to the realization of the necessary changes. So what I'm going to have you do is look at each of those points, and I'm going to have you pick out how you are understanding your own way that you're working through your environmental issue personally and experientially and emotionally by way of one of these platform principles of arne næss. So in other words, how do you see your experience of the environment and what you want to do for it working through one of these principles by way of experience and emotion, okay? So I'll have more specifics when I lay this out for the work that we're going to be doing and taking it from there, okay? So the most important thing here is that what we're looking at is that the way that we understand the environment is not separate from how it is that we understand our experience as human beings, okay? And we understand that holistically by way of emotion and also by way of reason as well, okay? And so this is going to be the emphasis of how we're working through deep ecology, and likewise how it is that we're understanding environmental ethics in general as having a phenomenological, i.e. an experiential understanding that we're trying to tie to our personal experience, okay? So think about that stuff and take it from there. Thank you. Bye-bye.